Dr. Laila, thank you for being with us today and speaking to us to help us as parents become more understanding of what our children are going through in a trauma, whether it's divorce or any other trauma. Welcome, and I'm glad to have you here.
Thank you. I'm humbled and I'm happy to be here. Thank you.
Would you explain to us exactly what is a trauma? And is a divorce that children are going through, their parents are going through, is that qualified as a trauma?
Yes. So, a trauma, put simply, is an overwhelming, uncontrollable experience that psychologically impacts victims by creating in them a feeling of vulnerability, loss of control, and helplessness. And maybe the one word that always pops to my mind in trauma, especially in trauma in children, is the word loss, because they've lost so much. Divorce is certainly a kind of trauma. There are different kinds of trauma. There are traumatic events that would include things like war, terror, sexual abuse, rape, things like that. But there are also other types of trauma where divorce would fall, which is the traumas that do not happen because of violence, of any kind of violence. So we can say divorce, we can say like death of a pet, death of a person you love, someone who left to go into the military, a change of school. These would also all be considered traumas not caused by any kind of violence.
Thank you for that clarification. It must have been fascinating, or continues to be fascinating, of traveling all over the world and working with children all over the world. Can you speak to us about a universal reaction that children have in trauma?
I'm originally from Egypt, and so I've worked a lot in the Middle East, in Syria, in Jordan, in Egypt, in Kuwait, always with traumatized children or with refugee children. And it is amazing because trauma is trauma all over the world. It looks the same. It does not differ because of nationality or because of anything. It's just amazing how God has programmed us that trauma causes mainly three things. The first thing is the feeling of loss of control. And this is something really scary for kids because they just don't know what is happening. Probably nobody's talking to them about what's happening. And so they just feel totally powerless and out of control. This leads them to be very vulnerable. And of course, vulnerability, it's quite a serious thing in kids because it makes them more vulnerable for abusers. It makes them more vulnerable for people to get into their lives and speak into their lives when they have no business doing that at that time. And so as parents, we need to be, focused on that. The third thing that happens is that they feel they have no voice. They have no say in what's happening. They have no say in leaving the house or changing schools or whatever. Mainly it robs the children of their treasures, the place they've known. This has to be taken seriously because this is the spiritual foundation of the child. As they grow, they need to know that they can speak out. So for example, I'm going to tell you something personal. My father was a workaholic, so for me that caused me a trauma because he was like never there and things like that. And so when I started my relationship with Jesus, I thought that he would also have no time for me. So it put the base for me that God is too busy, you know. So there are a lot of things that are just become part of your formation. And this is what trauma does to the children. You feel like they have damaged emotions. And so it does cause a lot of stuff in the child's life that might show up later in different behaviors and stuff.
So, how can we as parents, how can we help our children going through the trauma of divorce or any subsequent trauma that they may be going through?
First of all, divorce happens. I think it is so important for the parents to know that this is not the end of the world, that there is a life after divorce, that they can still feel loved, that Jesus loves them very much, and that being divorced and being maybe divorced with your children doesn't make you less of a family. And so this is so important because the feelings of sometimes guilt and shame and the stigma, maybe it's not as much here in the US, but in the Middle East, it is still a big stigma to be divorced. Actually, many people hide the fact that they have divorced because of the stigma. And so I think it's very important for divorced men and women to realize that they are loved by God, that they are still a family, that there is a life after divorce, that they can still serve their children. Just like when we get on an airplane and they tell you about the seat belt and I don't know what they always say, if there's any change in pressure, there'll be a mask that's going to drop, and then when the mask drops, put your mask first, I mean, before helping the person beside. And so it is so important to self-care after divorce before we help our kids, because honestly, I mean, if I am not healthy, I will not be able to help anybody around me. So it's so important to be to take care of yourself physically, to take care of yourself emotionally, to take care of yourself spiritually. Find people around you who will be able to help you go through this phase of your life and to love on you and to encourage you. And so this is very, very important. So before we help our children, we need to be doing that. But with the children, there are four main things that we can do to help the children recover from the trauma that happened. The first thing is that they need to have structure, because the kids, maybe they left their homes. They, of course, one of the parents is not there anymore. Maybe they changed schools. Maybe they had to leave the house and go somewhere else. So there's all this loss of control. So many things have changed. Maybe they won't be able to see their grandparents of the divorced spouse. And so there are all these changes. So the first thing I need to do is as a parent, I need to put back structure into the child's life. The child needs predictability. They need to know what's going to happen. They need to have a safe environment, an environment where they know what will happen later. Because honestly, predictability and things that we do every single day are very important. They make us feel safe. They make us know what to expect. This is a big thing. In the structure is also discipline, because so many times, out of guilt or shame, or because we feel very sorry for the children, so we let them do stuff that we wouldn't otherwise have allowed them to do. And I think discipline is so important because it also makes the kids feel safe. I always like to say the example is, if you go into a 13-story building and it's not finished, it's still under construction, and you go out on the balcony and there's no fence, you would never even approach because it is not safe. But once the fence is there, you will go, you will look at the view. So discipline makes the kids feel really safe. The second thing that the parents can do is talking and time. The kids need time to open up and tell us of the trauma that they had. And they really need to talk about what happened. I mean, so many times we think, oh, it's going to go away on its own, they don't need to talk about it. Or because we have so much stuff going on and maybe we haven't talked to anybody yet. So we don't know how to let the kids talk. But time and developing the trust that they can actually tell the parent about what they are feeling, what they're going through, that they miss the parent who's not there, that they love both of them, and should they feel guilty about loving both of them at the same time, that when they go to the other parent, they are missing this one. So, I mean, it needs time. And of course, talking needs someone to listen. So listening to the child is important. Not making fun of the child, not belittling what the child is saying, or telling him that, oh, this will pass, it's not important. So this is, it's a serious thing not to listen to the child. The third thing that we can do is play. And this is one of the things that tells a lot about what the child is feeling. It needs to be organized play. So it's not just playing for play's sake, but it's playing that becomes an instrument for healing. One of the things, for example, that I use a lot, usually when I counsel kids of divorced parents, is a dollhouse. And it's amazing by just letting the kids play with the dollhouse, how much you can learn about the child, about what happened, how they can just by playing tell exactly. So I remember like one of the girls, her parents used to fight a lot before they divorced. She had the mom, the dad, and her sister, just, figures of dolls and stuff. They would fight, and she would put herself always in the middle of the parents. And it was amazing because at the end she would put everyone on the sofa and say, but we're still a family.
Oh,
So it was heartbreaking, but at the same time it actually showed this is what she is feeling, this is what happens. So organized play where they can actually tell about their feelings. In the middle of the organized play, I can ask questions. I can ask, like, what do you think the mother felt? What do you think the father? What do you think she is feeling right now? So there are a lot of things that we can do. It's not just play for play's sake, but it involves being observant of what is happening. There are a lot of benefits to play. The kid who felt out of control because of the divorce and everything, changing schools, homes, and everything, when they play, they feel they are in control.
mm,
They have the power to put whatever they want wherever they want it, to draw whatever they like to. So it gives them a sense of control and of safety. And it honestly gives them also a sense of hope. Because sometimes, like, we would ask, what would have been the best outcome of this story that you drew or the story that you told? And they can actually put a better, not a better, but a happy outcome to the story and make them think of things that maybe they didn't think before. Of course, parental support in trauma is so, so important because at the end of the day, the kids have spiritual needs, and the parent needs to be the one who affects the view of God of the child. And so, as they do that, they need to assert their identity in God, that they are loved, that they have a sense of self worth, security, and protection. So, actually, there's a lot that parents can do. I don't want to overwhelm the parents, but I think it just needs a little bit of planning, maybe sharing with others who have gone through the same trauma, who have gone through divorce, and how they too could help their children.
thank you for that. Two questions. One comes to mind from what you're saying, Dr. Laila. What if children don't open up? How can we help them? Of course, we can't force them, but there's a lot going on inside of their minds that we can't tap into. How do we help those children who are not able to open up or won't talk?
How children react depends a lot on the personality of the child. So if the child is an introvert by nature, they will become more so. Also, if the child tried to speak and was shushed or was told, it's not the time or we're busy, they will probably feel that they will not speak again. I think maybe if there is a person who is other than the parent, a friend, maybe the social worker at school, These can help. Also, one of the things that we're starting now in Arabic, actually, in the Middle East, is the divorce care for kids. I think this is an amazing tool because the kids actually open up without realizing they're opening up. We have, yeah, you have the feeling sheet, and then they tell about how they're feeling, and then they realize that there are other kids who are actually going through the same thing that they're going through. There are several ways, but at the same time, we have to respect the timing of the child, not push the child into doing something before the child is ready to do it, because at the end of the day he feels out of control and powerless, and so I don't need to make that even worse by pushing them to say what they don't need to say.
Right, right. Makes total sense. So sometimes children react to trauma or to divorce by doing things that are, we don't feel as parents it's not connected. So for example, rebellion or trying drugs or doing things that are out of character. Can you speak to that, of why they're doing it, and how we as parents can react to it, as to not overreact, but to help them through?
Different children react differently. Sometimes we see behavioral changes. For example, a child would regress to things. If the child is 7 or 8 or 6 or 7, they might regress to wetting their bed again, just as a way to attract attention, and that they are hurting, but they don't know how to say it. Other times, the children might have nightmares, and the nightmares would be the same thing. I mean, it would be a repetitive of the same nightmare. I think any change in behavior in children, we have to see that as a cry for help. It is not that the child is bad. It's just the child saying, help me. I need to speak about that. I need to deal with what's happening, but I don't know how. Sometimes we see children who start having food disorders. So they might either stop eating, or they might eat a lot. And it's a way of them to regain control just by controlling their food. I had a girl who used to do cutting because she could not speak because they made fun of her, and so she felt that this was the only thing that will bring her solace. When kids do stuff like rebellion, when they have problems in schools, when they smash stuff, when they do drugs or alcohol, this is a cry for help. It's out of fear, it's out of not understanding what's going on. So I think that as a parent, we need to contain that with love, with affection, with not making them feel even more guilty or unloved or shunned. On the contrary, we need to love on them, which is sometimes, especially if the kid becomes too rebellious, it is very hard to do that.
Mhm.
And this comes again, here comes the body of Christ that can help each other, and people who have walked that road before can actually help us get through this. I believe there is not a child who is bad.
I
I
love
mean, they're
that.
sinful, but they're not bad.
Like their parents. So role play with me for just a minute on this. So we have identified our child is acting out, and we know, okay, this is a cry for help. So what is my first approach as a parent? So I go to my son or my daughter. What is the first thing that I say to start helping them?
The identification of how they feel is very important. So, for example, I have found that the feeling cards, for example, are a way of opening a subject that might be painful otherwise. What are you feeling right now? And sometimes you are going to be surprised, because sometimes they would choose confused, or they would choose ashamed. It's going to open a door for conversation. Also, if the parent approaches the child with, I know you are hurting. So I'm not really blaming the kid, but I am telling him I understand that even though what he's doing is wrong, or is maybe detrimental to the child himself or to someone else around him. But I need to tell them, I know you are hurting, I'm hurting too. I'm also confused. There are a lot of things that are happening, and I don't understand why they're happening. How can we get through this together? When the child feels that the parent loves them in spite of what is going on,
Mm.
that I'm not going to scream out or, whatever, that I'm here for you, we're on the same team, we're not enemies, and we'll get through this together.
I really love that. And you spoke about the emotion cards. We could even just make a list perhaps and find those emotions. So if we're dealing with a teen, we could provide that list of emotions and ask them that question.
Definitely. Yes.
I love that. That's a very practical tool because we are so many times at a loss of how to help our children, whether that's going through the divorce or other issues in life. So you have been literally around the world and you must have thousands of stories of children. And I'm sure one or two comes to mind that you would share with us.
One of the stories I remember is, so I had a lady who was divorced, and she was divorced for a very small reason. And she came for counseling. She had two boys who were 5 and 8. When she divorced, she went back, she stayed with her mother and her sister. So all the people who were at home were women. So after a while, as she came back, she said, my sons are laughing like us, and there is no male figure around them that can help them. At that time, I asked her, I said, would your children like to have drum lessons? And she just like looked at me, what's that got to do with what I'm telling you? I went back to my son and I told him, they have no male figure to look up to. Would you be willing to give them drum lessons? And when he knew why, he said, yes, of course. So he started doing boxing before they started, and I don't know what, and doing all the macho things they do together as males. And within 6 months, it was like there was a total change, and she really thanked me. But at the same time, I also counseled the two boys, and we did with them. There's also a very nice program called Celebration Station, which is with Celebrate Recovery. It is for children, and we did that with them. So they both recovered from the trauma of divorce plus that. And so it was amazing. The second story that comes to mind is the story of that girl that with the dollhouse. This girl, unfortunately, I discovered that she was being abused by her father every time she goes to him. She used to see him once every 2 weeks. And I suspected at the beginning, but then I was 100% sure. In the Middle East, even if you report the cases, they don't really do anything about it, which is really sad. She could draw a lot. She loved drawing, and so I told her, okay, draw yourself when you go to your dad. And she drew herself in a cupboard, hiding with the pillow in front of her. And it was like, why are you drawing that? And she said, because I always feel scared when I go to my dad. And so through the time, we actually did get the father reported and indicted because of what he's done. But the girl had to go into a counseling for about a whole year. And she actually, went through the recovery that was amazing. Now this girl is 15, and she's doing much better. The things that are really amazing is when you work, for example, with refugees. I actually have pictures of all the drawings that they do. So we give them like a big paper, and the paper is divided into two. One is their life they were Iraqi refugees in Jordan. One would be like their life in Iraq. So you find that they draw, they bombed our home, and this is blood, and this is me crying, and this is I don't know what. And then the other half is when they went to Jordan as refugees, and they have the sunshine, and I feel happy. So I mean, it's just amazing how children really want to tell about what happened, but we need to know the venues to do that. But it is heartbreaking. And since I started working with refugees, the Lord has given me the verses in Isaiah. I will need to read them because I read my Bible in Arabic. It's in Isaiah 61. And that's what I think anyone who's working with trauma or divorce or abuse or whatever, that's what on my heart is. The Lord has anointed me to preach good news to the poor. He has sent me to bind up the brokenhearted, to proclaim freedom for the captives and release from darkness for the prisoners, to comfort those who mourn and provide those who grieve, to give them a beautiful headdress instead of ashes, the oil of gladness instead of mourning, the garment of praise instead of a faint spirit, that they may be called oaks of righteousness, the planting of the Lord, that he may be glorified. So at the end of the day, I think there's a part in counseling where you cannot go any further without Jesus. I think there is a point where you literally need to take the person's hand, put it in the hands of Jesus so that they can complete the road to recovery. I don't think there is complete recovery without him, because he is the one who actually took the shame, he took the guilt, he took, the mourning, the trauma. He's taken everything on the cross, and he paid the price for it. So I think he's the only one who can take us to total recovery.
That is a beautiful note to end on. Dr. Laila, thank you for speaking with us today. Thank you for your work as you do go literally around the world and bind the brokenhearted and work with them. And we are just so grateful that you would be with us today. Thank you for your work, your ministry, and for ministering to us.
Thank you for giving me this opportunity, Kathy.